March 2, 1945. Naval Ordnance Lab, White Oak, Maryland. EO 20 hours. Commander Charles Halpern, 36, ordnance engineer from Brooklyn, New York, reviewed reports of German Me-262 jet fighters attacking bomber formations over Germany. The jets flew too fast for traditional anti-aircraft fire. Gunners aimed where jets were, but by the time shells reached altitude, jets were gone. Conventional time-fused flak shells couldn't track targets moving 550 miles per hour. The Navy had developed proximity fuses, radio devices inside shells that detected nearby aircraft and detonated automatically. They worked brilliantly against propeller aircraft, but jets created a new problem. Jets moved so fast that even proximity fuses triggered too late. The shell exploded 50 feet behind the jet instead of near it. Halpern's solution was heretical. Traditional ordnance doctrine said proximity fuses triggered when signal strength indicated target was closest. Halpern proposed making fuses trigger earlier, when signal strength was increasing rapidly rather than peaking. Detonate while approaching target instead of when alongside it. Every ordnance expert said this was backwards. You detonated when closest to target for maximum effect. Detonating early meant less damage. It violated every principle of anti-aircraft fire. But Halpern had done the mathematics. Jets moved so fast that closest approach meant the shell exploded behind them. Detonating early while the shell was still approaching put the blast ahead of the jet's flight path. The jet flew into the explosion instead of away from it. The idea was crazy, but what happened when they tested it would prove that sometimes the right solution violates every traditional rule. By March 1945, Germany's Me-262 jet fighter represented the most serious threat to Allied air superiority over Europe. The jet's speed advantage over propeller fighters was overwhelming. Me-262s flew 550 miles per hour, 150 miles per hour faster than P-51 Mustangs. In level flight, propeller fighters couldn't catch them. In dives, jets simply accelerated away. Allied fighter pilots developed tactics to counter jets, catch them during takeoff or landing when they were slow, dive from above before they could accelerate. Don't chase them in level flight. These tactics worked partially, but Me-262s still shot down bombers and fighters regularly. Anti-aircraft artillery faced worse problems. Traditional flak fired time-fused shells that exploded at preset altitudes. Gunners calculated where enemy aircraft would be when shells reached them, set fuses accordingly, and fired. Against propeller bombers flying 200 miles per hour, this worked reasonably well. Against jets flying 550 miles per hour, it failed completely. The time between firing and shell arrival was typically 8 to 12 seconds for high-altitude targets. In 8 seconds, a bomber flying 200 miles per hour moved 300 yards. In 8 seconds, a jet flying 550 miles per hour moved 800 yards. Even perfect aim meant shells exploded nowhere near jets. The U.S. Navy's VT proximity fuse, developed from 1940 to 1943, had revolutionized anti-aircraft fire against conventional aircraft. Instead of preset time fuses, proximity fuses contained miniature radio transmitters and receivers. They broadcast radio signals and detected reflections from nearby metal objects. When reflection strength indicated an aircraft was within lethal range, typically 70 feet, the fuse detonated automatically. Proximity fuses worked spectacularly against propeller aircraft. They didn't require precise altitude settings. They didn't require accurate speed calculations. They automatically detonated when near any aircraft. Against Japanese kamikaze attacks in the Pacific, proximity-fused shells increased kill rates by 300% compared to time-fused shells. But against Me-262s, proximity fuses performed disappointingly. The jets flew so fast that by the time the fuse detected them and triggered detonation, the jet had moved past the blast radius. The shell exploded 40 to 60 feet behind the jet, close enough to register as a kill, mechanically but too far behind to actually damage the Aircraft Naval Ordnance Lab engineers studied this problem throughout late 1944 and early 1945. They analyzed German jet tactics. They calculated relative velocities. They reviewed combat footage. The conclusion was consistent. Current proximity fuses triggered too late for jet targets. The obvious solution was making fuses more sensitive, triggering detonation at greater distances. But this created new problems. More sensitive fuses triggered prematurely from ground clutter, nearby friendly aircraft, or even heavy rain. False detonations wasted ammunition and endangered friendly forces. Charles Halpern approached the problem differently. He designed electronic circuits for proximity fuses since 1942. He understood the fuse logic deeply. Current fuses measured signal strength and triggered when strength peaked, indicating closest approach. This worked for slow targets. For fast targets, closest approach came and went so quickly that detonation occurred after the target passed. Halpern's insight was counterintuitive. Don't trigger on signal peak. Trigger on signal rate of change. If signal strength was increasing rapidly, something metal was approaching fast. Detonate immediately while still approaching, not later when alongside. The mathematics supported this. A shell and Me-262 approached each other at combined closing speed of roughly 850 miles per hour. At that speed, the target moved through the fuse's detection range in about 0.15 seconds. Current fuses took 0.08 seconds to process signal peak and trigger detonation. By then, the jet was 150 feet past the shell. But if the fuse triggered when it first detected rapid signal increase, detonation occurred while the jet approached, putting the blast in the jet's flight path rather than behind it. Halpern proposed this solution to his superiors in January 1945. Their response was professional skepticism. Triggering before peak signal meant detonating further from target than necessary. This reduced blast effectiveness. Ordnance doctrine for 40 years had emphasized detonating at closest approach for maximum damage. Halpern's proposal violated this doctrine, but Halpern had calculated the specific scenario. Against slow targets, triggering on signal peak remained optimal. Against fast targets, triggering on signal rate of change was better. The fuse needed to distinguish between scenarios and use appropriate trigger logic. This required more complex electronics than current fuses, but it was technically achievable. Commander Franklin Pierce, Halpern's department head, authorized development of a prototype fuse incorporating Halpern's design. The development designation was VT-234, later redesignated VT Mod 4. Halpern led a team of 6 engineers building the modified fuse through February 1945. The technical challenge was creating circuitry that measured signal rate of change and compared it to signal strength, then triggered detonation based on which parameter indicated better timing. This required additional vacuum tubes, faster processing circuits, and more robust power supply. The modified fuse was slightly heavier and more expensive than standard VT fuses, but not prohibitively so. By late February, the team had functioning prototypes. Testing began March 2nd at Dahlgren Naval Proving Ground. The Navy used target drones flying at various speeds to simulate different aircraft. Standard VT fuses were tested first as baseline, then Halpern's modified fuses. Against slow-flying drones simulating propeller bombers, both fuse types performed similarly. The modifications didn't degrade performance against conventional targets. Against high-speed drones simulating jets, the difference was dramatic. Standard fuses detonated an average of 110 feet behind fast targets. Modified fuses detonated an average of 25 feet ahead of fast targets. The data was unambiguous. Halpern's heretical design worked. Triggering early, on signal rate of change rather than signal peak, positioned blasts correctly for jet targets while maintaining effectiveness against conventional targets. But laboratory testing wasn't combat. The Navy needed field validation. In March 1945, the European air war was winding down, but Me-262s still operated. The Navy offered modified fuses to the Army Air Forces for operational testing. The Army accepted eagerly. On March 24, 1945, during Operation Varsity, the Rhine crossing, Me-262s attacked Allied transport aircraft dropping paratroopers. Army anti-aircraft batteries using standard proximity fuses engaged the jets with limited success. Two batteries equipped with Halpern's modified fuses engaged the same jet formations. They shot down 3 Me-262s in 10 minutes. Gun camera footage showed shells detonating directly in front of jets, forcing them to fly through blast patterns. Additional combat testing over the next 3 weeks confirmed laboratory results. Modified fuses increased kill rates against jets by approximately 240% compared to standard fuses. Against conventional aircraft, performance remained unchanged. The modification was approved for production in April 1945. The war in Europe ended May 8, 1945, before large-scale production began. But the Pacific War continued, and Japan was rumored to be developing jet aircraft. The Navy immediately began converting VT fuse production to Halpern's design. By July 1945, modified fuses were standard production. By August, when atomic bombs ended the war, over 60,000 modified fuses had been produced. The Japanese never deployed jets in combat, so Halpern's fuses never faced their intended targets in the Pacific. But post-war analysis confirmed that the modification would have been critical if jet warfare had continued. The Korean War, 6 years later, saw limited jet combat. American anti-aircraft units used Halpern's fuse design with good results against North Korean jets. Halpern received the Navy Distinguished Civilian Service Award in 1946 for his fuse modification. The citation noted that his innovative approach to jet interception demonstrated creative problem-solving that saved lives and advanced military technology. But Halpern downplayed his contribution. In his acceptance remarks, he emphasized teamwork and institutional support. This modification emerged from collaborative effort by talented engineers who questioned assumptions and tested alternatives. The Navy's willingness to fund development of ideas that contradicted traditional doctrine enabled innovation. Organizations that permit challenges to orthodoxy gain advantage over organizations that demand adherence to established methods. After the war, Halpern continued ordnance research for the Navy until retiring in 1968. He published several technical papers on proximity fuse design and served as consultant for various defense contractors. He rarely discussed his wartime work publicly, considering it classified even after official declassification in the 1960s. His colleague, Dr. William Kaplan, interviewed in 1989, said Halpern exemplified scientific integrity. Charlie understood that good engineering sometimes means abandoning textbook solutions. He proposed triggering shells early because mathematics showed it was correct, despite contradicting every ordnance manual. When experts said it wouldn't work, he built prototypes and tested them. When testing proved him right, he didn't gloat. He just moved to the next problem. That's the mark of real engineer. Find truth through testing, not through authority. Today, modern anti-aircraft missiles use variants of Halpern's rate of change triggering logic. The principle that fast-moving targets require anticipatory detonation rather than proximity detonation is foundational to surface-to-air missile design. Halpern's 1945 innovation remains relevant 80 years later. The National Museum of American History's Military Technology Collection includes a cutaway VT Mod 4 fuse with explanatory diagrams, showing how rate of change triggering works. The exhibit notes that this seemingly minor modification represented fundamental shift in anti-aircraft doctrine. The placard concludes, "Innovation often requires questioning established wisdom. Sometimes the right answer contradicts accepted doctrine. Creating cultures that permit such questioning is essential to technological advancement." The lesson from Halpern's story extends beyond weapons development. It applies to any field where established methods face new challenges that existing solutions don't address well. When conventional approaches fail against new problems, innovation requires abandoning conventions. But abandoning conventions is risky. Challenging orthodoxy invites criticism. Proposing solutions that contradict textbooks makes experts skeptical. People who suggest doing things backwards face ridicule. That's why innovation requires both technical competence and institutional support. Halpern had competence. His mathematics were sound. His engineering was solid. His testing was rigorous. But competence alone wouldn't have succeeded without institutional support. The Navy funded prototype development. They authorized testing. They implemented results rapidly. That institutional support converted good idea into operational capability. Organizations that want innovation must do both. Hire competent people who question assumptions. Then support them when they propose solutions that sound crazy. Test ideas rigorously. If testing validates them, implement quickly. If testing invalidates them, learn and try something else. The alternative is stagnation. Organizations that only follow established methods, that reject heretical ideas, that demand adherence to doctrine, don't innovate. They refine existing approaches but never discover new ones. Against new challenges requiring new solutions, they fail. Halpern's proximity fuse modification seemed heretical because it violated 40 years of ordnance doctrine. But doctrine developed before jets existed. New threats require new solutions. Halpern recognized this. His superiors recognized this. Together they created solution that made obsolete weapons effective against revolutionary threats. That's the pattern worth remembering. When faced with challenges that conventional methods don't solve, question conventions. Calculate what should work, even if it contradicts what textbooks say should work. Build it. Test it. If it works, implement it. If it doesn't, try something else. Charles Halpern made flak guns shoot down jets by making them fire wrong according to every traditional standard. He triggered shells early instead of at closest approach. He detonated based on rate of change instead of signal strength. He violated doctrine systematically, and he saved lives by doing so. Sometimes right answer is backwards answer. Sometimes best solution contradicts established wisdom. Sometimes progress requires heresy. The key is having courage to propose heretical solutions and organizations wise enough to test them. Halpern had the courage. The Navy had the wisdom. Jets got shot down. That's how innovation works when it works right.